Brothers and sisters of Africa, when the pages of history are written with honesty and read with open eyes, they shall say that in the dark hours of betrayal, when many bowed for comfort, one young man stood for truth. They shall say that when leaders grew silent in fear, Ibrahim Traoré spoke with fire in his lungs and freedom in his soul. They shall say he did not rise for applause, he rose for the people. He did not fight to be remembered, he fought because he could not forget what his people endured. He is not just a man in uniform, he is a symbol of resistance, a living testament that Africa still produces lions who refuse to be tamed. While many sought to negotiate their dignity, he reclaimed it. While others asked for permission, he demanded justice. While some begged for scraps, he chose sovereignty. That is why today I do not come to flatter you, I come to awaken you. To remind you that the spirit of Traoré is not buried in Burkina Faso, it is burning in every African heart that dares to believe we are not destined to remain poor, passive, and powerless. They say the truth is dangerous, but I say the real danger is silence in the face of lies. In an age where deception is dressed in diplomacy, where betrayal is packaged as partnership, and where occupation wears the suit of cooperation, Ibrahim Traoré dared to speak the truth without fear. And that alone shook the pillars of global hypocrisy. He looked into the eyes of former colonizers and said what others only whispered in private. He did not speak with hesitation. He did not measure his words for comfort. He declared with the full weight of conviction that Africa does not belong to Europe, it does not belong to the West, and it does not belong to corporations. Africa belongs to Africans. That is why they fear him. That is why they try to silence him, because he reminded us that the emperor has no clothes. He pulled the mask off imperialism, and what the world saw was the same ugly system that has looted, dominated, and divided Africa for generations. He stood before the world and asked, how can a continent so rich remain so poor? How can nations with gold, uranium, oil, and fertile soil continue to beg for aid? How is it that Africa exports everything and imports poverty? He spoke the truth that many have buried under statistics and diplomatic statements, that the wealth of Africa continues to be stolen, not by ghosts, but by systems designed to keep Africa dependent. He pointed to the military bases scattered across the continent, not for the protection of Africa, but for the control of its resources. He asked why foreign troops occupy African soil in the name of security, while the insecurity only grows. He challenged the illusion that Africa is being helped when in reality Africa is being held hostage, but his truth did not stop at the borders of Burkina Faso. His words traveled beyond his country. They echoed in the streets of Bamako, in the alleys of Kinshasa, in the markets of Accra, and in the townships of South Africa. Because when a man stands with truth, he does not need an army to carry his message. Truth moves faster than bullets and deeper than fear. The people heard him and said, finally, someone is speaking for us. Finally, someone is not afraid to name the enemy. Not the enemy of skin color, but the enemy of domination, extraction, and exploitation. This kind of truth comes with a price. Those who speak it are not invited to summits. They are not praised by mainstream media. They are not awarded medals by the same hands that exploit their people. Instead, they are demonized, isolated, and threatened. But Traoré did not flinch, because he understood that fear is the weapon of the oppressor and truth is the shield of the oppressed. He knew that the moment you bow to fear, you lose the power to change your reality. And that is what made his voice different. He did not speak from theory, he spoke from principle. And in a world where principles have been traded for politics, that kind of clarity is revolutionary. He called out the hypocrisy of those who preach democracy abroad but fund dictators at home. He exposed the game where African leaders are treated like puppets, where sovereignty is only allowed if it serves foreign interests, where elections are free only if the results favor the powerful. He reminded us, that the chains of today are no longer just metal, they are debts. They are trade deals. They are military agreements signed in silence and enforced with fear. He tore the veil and showed the raw truth that Africa is still under siege not by open war, but by economic sabotage and political manipulation. And the most dangerous truth he spoke was this, that we as Africans must stop blaming only outsiders. That we must recognize the collaborators within, those who wear our skin but serve foreign interests, those who speak our languages but undermine our future. He dared to say that until Africa stops selling itself, it will remain for sale. That truth is what shook the world, because it turned the mirror inward and challenged all of us to stop being spectators of our own exploitation. He did not just expose the external forces, he reminded us of our internal responsibility. Because truth without action is decoration, but truth with action is transformation. And that is the legacy he has begun to write, a legacy not of fear, but of fearless honesty, a legacy not of position, but of principle, a legacy not of quiet submission, but of loud resistance, and that is why they fear him, because they know that when one man speaks the truth without fear, he inspires millions to rise and speak with him. And so, I say this to you, when you speak the truth, speak it boldly. When you stand for justice, stand without apology, because the world may not reward you, but history will never forget you. They say leadership is a title. They say power comes from palaces, motorcades, and foreign validation. But Ibrahim Traoré gave us a different definition. He did not rule from golden chambers surrounded by luxury while the people starved. He did not speak behind velvet curtains while the streets burned. No, he walked with the people. He led not from a podium but from the ground. He did not only speak of revolution, he lived it. In a time when many leaders rule over their people, he chose to stand with them. While others sat in silence watching their nations fall, he rose from among the people and gave them back something that had long been stolen, dignity, and let us not confuse his simplicity for weakness. Simplicity is not surrender, simplicity is strength, because true power does not need a crown to be seen. It does not need applause to be heard. It does not need luxury to feel secure. It needs only purpose. And Traoré's purpose was clear: to return power to the hands of the people, not through promises, but through practice. In his words and in his actions, he reminded us that the government is not a master, it is a servant. That the people are not subjects, they are sovereign, and that the time had come for Africa to stop asking for freedom and start exercising it. He did what many leaders fear. He trusted the people. He listened to the cries from the ground. He visited the places where poverty had become permanent. He walked where the elite refused to go, and in doing so, he shattered the myth that power must be distant to be respected. He showed us that when leaders come down from their high towers and return to the dust and struggle of their citizens, they do not lose authority, they gain legitimacy, because no policy, no speech, no law carries weight if it is not rooted in the reality of the people. What makes Traoré different is not just that he gave speeches, it is that he followed them with action. He challenged foreign military presence, not just with words, but with the courage to remove it. He spoke of independence not just as an idea, but as a living demand. He rejected systems of dependency and dared to say that Africa must be governed by Africans, resourced by Africans, and protected by Africans. And in doing so, he became not just a president, he became a symbol that real leadership is not bought, it is not branded, it is earned by standing where the people stand and serving where they suffer. While many were busy decorating their offices, Traoré was cleaning the house of corruption. While many were selling national wealth to foreign bidders, he was returning it to national control. While many were shaking hands in distant lands, he was raising fists for justice in his own country. That is what makes the world uncomfortable. Not that he governs, but that he governs with principle. Not that he speaks, but that he speaks with truth. Not that he acts, but that he acts without asking for permission. He reminded the youth that leadership is not about age, it is about urgency. That to wait for the perfect moment is to waste the future. He showed them that the fire of revolution must not die with the old, it must be carried forward by the bold. And in doing so, he reignited something that many believed was lost, hope. Hope not written in books but seen in action. Hope not promised in manifestos but practiced in sacrifice. Hope that power can still be used to serve, not to exploit. And that hope spread. It moved beyond borders. It found its way into conversations from Abidjan to Nairobi. It inspired the street vendor, the student, the farmer, the worker. Because when people see leadership that is not afraid to get its hands dirty, they begin to believe again. They begin to rise again. They begin to act again. And that is the greatest gift a leader can give, not more promises, but a new standard, a standard that says the people deserve more than slogans. They deserve justice, dignity, and a future that is not borrowed, but built. So when they ask what made Traoré different, do not speak only of his military uniform or his youth. Speak of how he returned to the people what generations had been denied the power to dream, to act, and to own their destiny. Because that is what true leadership looks like, and that is why his name will not fade. And it is for this reason that I say again, the time for fear is over. They said that the spirit of Sankara died with him. They said that time had moved on, and that the age of fearless African revolutionaries had ended. They told us that boldness was now dangerous, that resistance was reckless, and that speaking the truth would only lead to isolation or death. But Ibrahim Traoré rose and proved them wrong. He did not rise to copy Sankara, he rose to continue a mission left unfinished. In his voice we heard the echo of a dream that had once been silenced. In his walk we saw the steps of a new generation refusing to forget where we came from. He did not seek comfort, he embraced sacrifice. He did not beg for permission, he claimed responsibility. And in doing so, he revived a spirit the world thought had been buried under decades of betrayal, fear, and compromise. What many failed to understand is that Sankara was not just a man, he was a mindset that declared Africa must feed itself, govern itself, and define itself. A mindset that rejected dependence and demanded dignity. That mindset was not supposed to return. The system made sure of that. They filled the continent with leaders more interested in pleasing donors than empowering citizens. They promoted those who borrowed more than they built, who followed more than they led, and they told us this was development. They gave us conferences, speeches, policies, and protocols, but never progress. They gave us debt dressed as aid and control dressed as cooperation. But Traoré stood up and disrupted that lie. He brought back a language that the people understood, the language of courage. He brought back a style that was not performative but principled. He wore his integrity like armor and walked through storms without blinking, and the people recognized it. Because even if generations have passed, the heart of Africa still remembers what true leadership feels like. It remembers what it means when a leader is willing to die for his beliefs. It remembers what it means when a leader chooses his people over his position. And that is why when Traoré spoke, Africa listened. Not just with ears, but with hope. He did not build statues of Sankara, he revived the values that built Sankara. He reminded us that patriotism is not about waving flags, but about working for justice. That revolution is not about rebellion for its own sake, but about reshaping systems that have crushed the dignity of our people. He showed that it is possible to be young and wise, fearless and focused, radical and responsible. He was not interested in titles, he was interested in transformation, and that is what separates him from many who claim to lead. For him, power was not an end, it was a means to restore what had been stolen, the soul of the nation. And when he began to dismantle the old systems that kept the people poor, while the few prospered, the world noticed. Not because they admired him, but because they feared the return of a spirit they thought they had silenced. They knew that one Traoré could awaken thousands more. They knew that the memory of Sankara was never buried, it was waiting for a voice bold enough to speak again, waiting for hands strong enough to build again, waiting for a heart brave enough to love the people more than the perks of power. And when Traoré rose, that memory became movement. You see, a true revolutionary does not speak for applause, he speaks for accountability. He does not walk for cameras, he walks for change. He does not dress for comfort, he dresses for struggle. And Traoré walked into that struggle with clarity, with humility, and with fire. He reminded Africa that we are not poor because of a lack of resources, we are poor because of a lack of righteous leadership. We are not weak because we lack history, we are weak because we refuse to learn from it. We are not silent because we lack words, we are silent because we have been taught that obedience is safer than truth. But the moment one leader rises and chooses to speak that truth, it breaks the chains on the minds of the people. It reawakens a sleeping generation, it reignites the fire of revolution, not the fire that burns buildings, but the fire that rebuilds dignity, the fire that restores identity, the fire that declares that Africa will no longer be managed, manipulated, or misled. That is the fire Traoré lit again. That is the spirit he called back into existence, and for that history will not just remember him, history will be shaped by him. Because when the dust settles and the lies fade, what will remain is the legacy of those who stood for something greater than themselves. Those who reminded us that even when hope is buried, it is never dead. And that is why the time for fear is over. They say one man cannot change a continent. They say the system is too strong, the powers too entrenched, the chains too tight. They say that resistance is futile, that the fire of revolution is too risky, that the people are too tired. But Ibrahim Traoré proved them wrong. He proved that when one man stands with purpose, not for fame, not for power, but for principle, the ground begins to shift. He showed us that it takes only one spark, one voice of conviction, to light a fire in the hearts of millions. He showed that even in an era of compromise, a single act of defiance rooted in truth can awaken a continent. He did not rise with an army of millions. He rose with a clear vision. He rose with moral clarity, the kind that frightens empires and inspires the forgotten. In a world where leadership is often bought and sold, where silence is rewarded and courage punished, he reminded us that authenticity is still the most powerful weapon. And in doing so, he became more than a president, he became a pulse, a rhythm that beat across Africa's borders. From dusty villages to crowded cities, his name became a code word for courage, a signal that the tide had turned, that something different had begun. He stood up at a time when many were kneeling. He took positions that others feared to even speak aloud. He questioned the legitimacy of foreign domination, not only militarily, but economically and intellectually. He dared to say what others would only whisper, that Africa must stop renting its future to those who looted its past. And when he acted, he did not wait for approval from the powerful. He moved because it was right, because the suffering of his people could no longer be measured in policies and meetings, but in hunger, unemployment, and despair. That is why his example spread like wildfire, because it reminded the youth of Africa that they are not voiceless, that leadership is not something to wait for, it is something to become, that we do not need permission to fight for our freedom, our resources, or our identity. His actions gave language to frustration and direction to rage. And across the continent, young people began to see in him not a politician, but a mirror of what they too could become. Not followers of the system, but challengers of it. Not caretakers of colonial leftovers, but architects of a new African dawn. He reignited the belief that power belongs to the people not in theory, not in textbooks, but in real time. When he walked the streets, the people saw in his eyes something they had not seen in years, honesty. When he spoke, they did not hear empty rhetoric, they heard resolve. And in a time when many leaders are symbols of betrayal, he became a symbol of possibility. That is why he is feared by those who benefit from the current order. Because they know his courage is contagious. They know that if others follow his example, their control will crumble. One man with purpose is dangerous to a system built on lies, because that man cannot be bought. He cannot be distracted with titles, he cannot be manipulated with threats, and he cannot be silenced by isolation. When his loyalty is to the people, when his mission is justice, and when his power comes from principle, he becomes unstoppable. Ibrahim Traoré walked that path not because it was safe, but because it was necessary, and through his courage he exposed the weakness of those who pretend to be strong. Through his clarity he revealed the confusion of those who claim to lead. His impact is not measured only by the policies he passed or the decisions he made, but by the millions who now dare to imagine a different kind of Africa, an Africa where dignity is non-negotiable, an Africa where leaders are servants, not kings, an Africa where youth rise not to flee the continent but to rebuild it. That is the Africa his example calls us to create, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Because if one man can rise and shake the chains of an entire system, then what can we do together? This is the message he has left us, that leadership is not about having power over others, but power with others. That greatness is not about ruling, but about serving. And that history does not remember those who stayed silent in comfort, but those who stood up in discomfort and dared to change the course of destiny. And for that, his legacy is not just in words, but in the awakening of a people who now know what it means to rise. And that is why the time for fear is over.